Why, it's Jeff Welton. First meeting of the month, and Jeff's here. So we're grateful for that. Jeff, I want to kick it off with a question, and I want to ask you to tell us something that no one has ever asked you before, or that you've never told anybody before. Uh, Not including the fact that you and I used to sneak off on Wednesdays for dinner at NAB, but something that you never said.
Wow. Okay. Thanks for putting me on the spot with that one.
Well, why not?
Um, Shoot, there's not a whole lot. I mean, my life is pretty much an open book. I don't keep a lot of secrets from y'all, mainly because I don't know how to keep my mouth shut. Um,
Well,
but
tell us how you got to Nautel. Was Nautel your first broadcast field job?
yeah, yeah. So, okay. Well, if you want the history lesson, it's kind of amusing insofar as, and I tell people, and I've said this before once or twice, that I kind of fell into this more than I tried to get into it. I mean, when I was a kid, we had you remember the Radio Shack electronics kits with not really a breadboard, but the plastic box with the metal clips, and you could jumper resistors between them and
Oh
make
yeah.
a cat's whisker radio or whatever. I made a couple of those. Made radio receivers. We had a grand total when I was growing up of exactly one radio station that you could hear on anything except an outdoor antenna. And I put a CB antenna up on the TV mast. I had a 60-foot TV mast, happened to go right outside my bedroom, and put a CB antenna up on that, and then used to just not jumper it, but move it over and connect the center conductor to the stereo in my bedroom. And with that, I could pick up 3 radio stations. So, Eastern Canada was not what you would call radio central at the time. And then when I was, it would be 81, 82, Halifax got a classic rock FM station. And I could pick that up late at night. And so that was really cool because I'd be, kind of huddling in my room, listening to this classic rocker. And they played the real classic rock, the Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, all the great stuff. And anyway, so that's fine. Right up till graduating high school, my yearbook said that I was going to the local vocational school to be a small engine mechanic because that was the goal. That's what I wanted to do. And then this slick talking sales guy come into our school. It'd be around about March or so of my senior year. And he was talking about electronics college in Toronto. Now, you got to remember, I grew up on a hobby farm in northern Nova Scotia. Our nearest town was about 15, 20-minute drive away, and it was 3,000 people. The nearest city was Halifax, which was 2.5 hours away. We got there maybe once a year, every 2 years. So he said Toronto, and it could have been cosmetology school. I was going. And, so except for the fact that it was Radio College of Canada, I could be, the world's best hairdresser right now, or I wouldn't be the best. But anyway, so I went to Radio College of Canada and we did electronics, and that was cool. Worked for Craco Car Stereo on their assembly line doing inspection and line modifications for quite a while. So got to drive there's one thing I've never told too many people, got to drive the Craco Indy race car from our loading dock to the other end of the parking lot once. That was almost an accident. But anyway, so yeah, I ended up doing that. And then one day I decided I'd had enough of Toronto, and a job came up working for Radio Shack doing bench repair. 3 years of that was more than enough. And then the job at Nautel came up. So like I say, I kind of stumbled into it more than anything. And it definitely wasn't any grand master plan. I wish I could say it was.
And now at the other end, you have your own radio station in your house.
No, I do not. But in my infinite spare time, I help out with local community stations. So, I do get to experience all the gripes and stuff that our customers groan about firsthand. And trust me, I've grown about the same stuff, which is, I guess, beneficial to some. But yeah, no. So I've got that. I don't have much radio stuff in the house at all, except a 70s vintage realistic receiver and a set of Mach 1 speakers that are in the process of being rebuilt again. But
I mean, you don't have a VS1 1000 or a little ND5?
no, so I'm that guy. No, well, now the Radio Shack has been refitted. It's got it's basically a PDM amplifier now.
Hmm.
So it's a 200 watt per channel running off IRF 130s and got a big honking PDM filter. So it's, maybe not quite as pristine on the distortion as it was when it came out originally, but it makes a lot less power with a lot less watts.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the little background there because it's something we didn't know about you, and now we do.
There you go. And the other things in my other infinite spare time, you'll probably find me gardening and woodworking or cooking as opposed to doing anything electronics related.
Like today's steaks and twice baked potatoes.
But do you have a Nautel being controlled by a TRS-80?
Now that I don't have, but it's kind of cool because, these days I say we don't build transmitters, we build computers with really high power, high frequency sound cards wrapped around them. And I started on computers with a Tandy Model 1 Level 1 cassette tape drive, acoustic coupler, 4K RAM. That thing rocked. I mean, that was awesome. You could make the stick figure walk across the screen all day long. And when I was in grade 10, the Apple II Plus came out and my high school got one and we had a night class in computers. So that was my first exposure to those.
Pretty good. Before we launch into a couple transmitter things here, Elaine, you want to tell us, you want a 9-inch driver for your speaker?
Yeah, this is kind of crazy. A while back, I picked up at probably a ham radio swap meet, one of these beautiful old RCA speakers. And of course, the speaker was blown. And when I finally took the thing apart and looked at it, it was a 9-inch driver. And I said, who in the world makes a 9-inch driver these days? A 10-inch is too big, an 8-inch, I'd have to rework the frame. So does anybody have any clue where I could find a 9-inch full range driver for a speaker?
Elaine, did you try partsexpress.com?
Which Express?
Parts Express.
Okay, I'll take a look there. No, I haven't looked at that one yet.
I've gotten replacement drivers for JBLs, which are more standard, obviously, but they seem to have everything.
Yeah. Anyway, 9-inch are pretty rare. I think they standardized on the 8s probably back in the 30s. Anyway, yeah, thanks, guys.
Okay. Well, Jeff and I were sort of looking at the question of what to expect when you're expecting theme. You're planning a new transmitter, this large equipment delivery, and you want to install it. And what are some of the things that people forget that we probably should make sure we have planned for? It's not as bad as it used to be, where the first thing you had to do was get a bigger electrical service. The newer transmitters don't draw quite as much. But Jeff, where should we start?
Okay, so I'll quantify that electrical service right off the bat, because if you're A, doing an upgrade, or B, adding HD to high injection level, then there's the one with the speed. Hey, could you turn your radio down? But yeah, so there are times, and definitely that is something to look at. And it's not just, you mentioned transmitters, but really any big purchase. There are a few things. That's one, obviously, the electrical service, to make sure it's big enough. We did our Tuesday webinar this week. We were doing swapping war stories with Tom Ray and talking about just engineering in general, contract engineering in specific. And one of my customers had sent in a picture of a studio that was a whole bunch of electrical boxes and outlets daisy chained together to one plug. They had the whole studio running off one outlet in the wall. There were probably 20 or 30 outlets all connected together with Romex and Tech2. It was beautiful. It was a definitely joy to behold. So yeah, planning the requisite amount of electrical, not just the amperage, but how many outlets or services or connections, breakers do I need? If you look, for example, our old 50 kilowatts, you had two either 240, 480, or 600 amp breakers, and then you had a 120 volt breaker for the volt big breakers, and then the 120 volts for the exciter. So, you know, you've got to make sure you allow for that. The other thing is the connectors. Oh my God, the connectors. Find out if the manufacturer provides them. Like if we send you a transmitter that's got the remote control on a D connector, we'll ship a D connector with it to mate with the one on the transmitter. Now you're still going to have to wire it up or solder it up. And if it was me, I'd throw it to the side and get one of those Phoenix terminal to D connector breakouts. But again, that's something else in the planning stage. You need to know you need it before you get there and start connecting it, because a lot of times you're taking the main thing down, putting the new one in, and you guys are off the air until you get this done. That's not the time to be realizing you need to call Winford Engineering for a breakout, or you need to go to Home Depot and get another electrical outlet, or. So the big thing is just putting down a spreadsheet. I like to do drawings. I'm very picture oriented. So I'll do a plan view, like a looking down view, and then looking at it from the side view. And I'll usually take my phone, and I mentioned this before, I love Evernote. Evernote is the app I use for all of this stuff, because I can take pictures, embed them in the drawing as links. I can, you know, put them on there as just little icons, whatever. But it lets me see what I'm looking at now, and then I can sort of sketch around what I want it to be. I try to do it all on paper before I pick up the first screwdriver. That's probably the big thing, because then you can sort of, at a more relaxed pace, when you're not off the air, or you don't have the GM phoning every 5 minutes going, are we on yet? Are we on yet? Are we on yet? When are we going to be on again? And Hal mentions he uses OneNote, and that's another good one. We use that as well. We're a Office 365 facility, and that's, yeah. And the great thing about, say what you will about Microsoft, but the whole Office 365 experience, whether you can import OneNote into Word, into Excel, into Teams, you can move it all back and forth. It's really convenient for that. It's kludgy as hell for almost everything else you do. And I see Jeff Wilson there, and he and I both share the same love-hate relationship with Teams. You know, there's been more than a little profanity uttered there. But again, pick whatever you're comfortable with, and just, you've heard me beat the drum on documenting. Well, if you start the documentation before you start the install, you're already ahead of the game.
Now, yeah, that's important. And as you say, you have enough breakers, and you want to have the power strip on your workbench that's not on the same circuit as your transmitter, and so that you don't run a short and go bang. The next thing I was going to ask you, Gordon has just beat me to it. Have you ever had a transmitter sale, and then you get a call from the guy in the field who says, Jeff, I can't get the transmitter in the building. It won't fit through the door.
So I'm going to tell you a couple of war stories. I may have shared this one before. I can't remember. Let's see. I just sort of skimming through who all was here, and I don't see anybody from New Orleans right now. But anybody who's familiar with the area knows that Bourbon Street is fairly busy, and the French Quarter is not exactly conducive to heavy equipment moves. We had a station in an office building down near the French Quarter, in the French Quarter. And their transmitter suite, their transmitter penthouse, was on the roof of the building, which is pretty common. 25 flights of freight elevator going up 25 stories, and then 2 flights of stairs to get to the roof access point. And this transmitter was a 40 kilowatt, so it's ballpark about 5.5 feet long, and 33 inches deep, and 6 feet and change tall. And those are the dimensions to remember. Now, the engineer, he planned it out carefully. He took cardboard and did a cutout, made sure the transmitter could get into the elevator and around the stairs, and, you know, out the door. And that was all that was all wonderful, but he missed the dimension, length, width, height. And at about, so the truck gets there, pulls into their loading dock. They offload the transmitter. They uncrate it to remove some of the height for the elevators, put it on hand truck. Actually, they had one of those stair climbers because they knew they were going to have to do that. But they drove it into the elevator up the 25 flights, onto the stair climber and around the corners and up, and everything's beautiful until they get to the 26 and a half flights. So they hit the landing on the 26 to 27. They made it up to 26 and a half, and there was a big concrete beam going across that and he measured the height. He knew he had 6 feet of clearance, but he didn't add the stair crawler. So they needed 7 feet. They didn't have 7 feet. And they ended up going back down a flight and a half of stairs, down 25 stories in the elevator, onto the truck. They ended up setting an arrangement up with the city of New Orleans. They basically shut Bourbon Street down for a day and ended up doing a helicopter lift. Has anybody ever rented a helicopter that'll handle 2 tons of transmitter? Those things, yeah, Gordon's making this picture. They don't come cheap. I think that the delivery went from being nominally about $3,500 to just about 30,000 all time it was all said and done. Now, having said that, you know, they would have had that cost anyway because there was just no physical way they could get it under that beam. But it would have been a lot less a shock if they had known about it ahead of time. And, you know, so again, those things. I had one site where it rained buckets the day of delivery, and they couldn't get a truck in within half a mile of the building. So they ended up renting one of those little track crawlers with the forks on it to forklift the transmitter in. We've got a picture of Chuck Kelly back when he was with us, walking through a rice paddy with a chunk of conduit and a transmitter, a full 6-foot rack, a transmitter strapped to this conduit, slung over his shoulder, and 2 guys behind him with it on theirs as well. So, yeah, you do what you got to do, but there's some interesting ones out there.
That's true. That's true. It's funny how so many times it's just a matter of 6 inches or a little more, a little less, and you can't get through the last door. But it's good to plan for these things ahead to get measurements. And I'm sure that when you tell people, you say, watch out for the trucks, the things like that.
Well, and Bill made a good point in here too. Make sure the truck has a lift gate, a tailgate lift. And this will vary somewhat. And when and something we started doing, and he's mentioned about one we delivered where the driver was just going to drop ship it. And yeah, I've seen literal drop shipments where they just shoved it off the back of the trailer. So not always preferred, but so in a lot of cases, every now we'll send out a questionnaire at some point, whether it's with the quote, whether it's with the order, whatever, but we won't process an order till we get that questionnaire back. And the last page of that questionnaire for anything that ships by freight as opposed to UPS is a questionnaire about the conditions of your site. What's your driveway? How far is it from the end of the driveway to the building? How close can the truck get? Do we need a lift gate? Do we need to handle stairs? You know, everything. We try to, as much as we can, foresee the whole situation because, yeah, it'll have a big impact on ease of delivery. And we try to make that part as smooth as we can. I mean, you're paying for it. So, you know, it certainly doesn't hurt to do it right.
No, absolutely not. I think about that a lot. And of course, there's every possible variation of road or non-road to different sites. And there are some where you literally have to carry stuff in, as you said, with Chuck. But yeah, that's a great checklist that you've mentioned there. And we should probably go and do something with that to share that in a general sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and Jeff Wilson has just shared it into the chat too. That is the full questionnaire that we have for the big boxes, and it's really, really critical for the high power stuff. I mean, anything 10 kilowatts or lower, whether AM or FM, you can usually move it on a like a hand truck, a heavy duty hand truck. You know, just take it off the pallet, slide it onto the hand truck, slap it in place. If you got to tip it a little to get through the door, whatever. But once you get above that, you're getting into things that are bigger than your standard 30-inch door opening. And at that point, you really need to be sure. I've had a bunch where we get it to the building, and then the only way it's going into the building is if you blow the door out. So, or blow a hole in the wall. So definitely pay attention to that.
I built a transmitter site one time, and I had the double doors, but the problem was it was 6 inches too tall.
Yep.
Had to take the frame out.
Same deal. And I mean, we've that's I think that's one of the questions on our questionnaire. Let's see. Can the door be removed if required? Question number 9. And Gordon's got a really good point there. And with this high-rise experience, if you're using an elevator, make sure you don't receive the weight limit and have a leveling plate, because that definitely can make a difference. I mean, it's really wonderful to be able to get into an elevator, and then all of a sudden the elevator won't line up with the floor when you get to the other end. So that's a really good point.
Now you have
And your
14
turning radius
items.
inside the elevator.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have 14 items on your list.
Well, that's any other site characteristics that could affect delivery. Terrain, tight inside building dimensions, turning radius, yard or lot restrictions, et cetera. And lot restrictions is another really good one, because we've delivered to a lot of places where your delivery agent has to be unionized. And that's something that we need to know about ahead of time, because I don't guarantee that whoever we hire for the last mile is, unless we know ahead of time.
We had one situation where we were trying to get a 20-foot tall collinear antenna, which was about 3-4 inches diameter by 20 feet. It went all the way without a problem until the last turn on the interior stairway. It just wouldn't make it. We had to hustle it all the way down and take it up on the outside of the building, unknown to the city. We just did it. Because it was a federal building.
We put a 30 kilowatt into Tower of the Americas in San Antonio. And their elevator, their observation deck is right. Can't remember. I think it's right below the transmitter floor. It might be right above. It's right above the transmitter floor. So you get into the transmitter floor, and it's just a maze of catwalks and low headroom. And David Stewart's here. I know he's seen it once or twice. And it's a really interesting. Well, the only way to get a transmitter in there is you take it up to the observation deck. Outside, you basically dangle it down and pull it in through the wall of the transmitter floor. It's Don Jones took tons of pictures. They put 3 V10s in like that. We're talking 800 pounds of transmitter dangling, several feet above the pavement. Let's put it that way. It was
that raises the question of, as you bring the new transmitter in, to maneuver it around the old one, or do you have to take the old one out first? Or, with a lot of sites, there used to be a lot of room, and now you've got multiple stations and no room.
The other one I've run into is where you'll get it there. They know there's room for it, but what they don't allow for is the actual, the getting it past the other stuff to its resting place. So and that's where the cardboard cutout is a good idea, because you can just sort of scoot it along on a pallet jack or whatever, and just make sure that it actually will physically fit where it's got to go. So it's, what do they say? Best laid plans of mice and men can sometimes gang awry. There's my Scottish heritage coming back.
I'm going to ask you a question that you're going to be tempted. No, I take that back. You're very careful not to put in your salesman's hat, but I'm going to want you to put it partially on, or we'll talk to Jeff. Well, how do you decide when it's time to upgrade a transmitter? This is a big problem with a lot of stations, because the owner says, hey, I've got a solid state transmitter. I never have to replace that.
Huh.
And now, so when do you decide what kind of time it is to replace the transmitter, how to replace it, and to consider analog or whether to make provision for HD now or later?
Well, that's a loaded question right there.
It's four questions.
Well, starting at the back, the HD question is pretty easy. I don't think I would build a station if I was replacing a transmitter where I didn't allow for HD. Now, don't get me wrong, I might buy a transmitter that is not, I've no plans on doing HD at all, but I'm going to size it accordingly, just working on the theory that replacement time is the time to do that. And if the FCC ever legislates it, 10 years from now, if they put out an R&O that says you better be HD within 5 years, then I don't want to be replacing a fairly new transmitter. So I'm going to size it accordingly and assume that I can upgrade it, even if I've got no plans to do it at all. And I'm certainly not going to buy the HD part, again, depending on my market. It's like I said once during an HD presentation, if you don't have a product to put on it, then don't waste your time doing it. I mean, that's just a whole lot of money for not a lot of reason if you don't have the product. But definitely plan to allow for it. And that's certainly something any manufacturer can accommodate. Working backwards beyond that, how do I know when it's time to replace it? Okay, well, here's an extreme. I was talking to a guy the other day. He's running an Eco 10. And we looked at his power bill. We did a cost of operation comparison. And if he leased our transmitter and replaced the Echo, it would cost him about $100 a month more than what he's paying right now. Now, once that lease is paid off in 5 years, then he's saving $700 a month. But it's still, he's running on a shoestring and he can't afford that. So in his case, he's looking at a license downgrade because he can't afford the power bill as it is. Well, with the license downgrade, he's looking at it, we put a 5 kilowatt in to replace that 10 kilowatt, all of a sudden he's saving $100 a month after he leases the transmitter. So, in that case, it's, and that's FM we're talking about. Now on AM, if you're running a tube transmitter, I say keep them as a backup, but if you're running a tube transmitter, you're losing money flat out. I mean, you can lease a current AM for enough to almost always, and it quantifies 5 kilowatts and up, definitely. Below that, it's break-even point. At the 1 kilowatt level, it's 1 light bulb versus 2 light bulbs. So I don't know that it's that big, but you can certainly do the cost of operation analysis. So that's one big thing. I use the example, I just replaced a 2009 Dodge Nitro that had close to 300,000 miles on it. And it got replaced because the power steering started to leak. That wasn't the reason it got replaced. I took it into the garage to get that looked at. My mechanic said, yeah, you got a pinhole in this hose. And I said, so we just replaced the hose. And he goes, well, and I've worked with my mechanic for a lot of years, and well, usually means we're going to add some zeros. And that's exactly what it was. He said, Dodge won't sell the hose. They'll only sell the rack, the whole rack. So all of a sudden, this $50 hose turned into a $1,500 rack assembly. And I said, oh, that's up there. I said, so if we replace that, I'm good to go for a while. And he goes, well, and I was like, Terry, we're going to stop talking soon. But so he ended up, he said, well, the problem is, he says, one of your wishbones is almost rotted through. Your tie rod ends are gone. He goes, to get this thing totally safe and good for another 3 years, probably about $3,000 to $5,000. And at that point, I went out and bought a new Chevy. So, that's one of the things that makes the call. Dave Bialik mentions the replacement decision based on parts availability, and Dan mentions product into life support. Well, that we don't support on ours, but there are some who do, definitely.
Well, there's a part to that I'm going to add to. But I want to start with a conversation you and I had some years ago. You may not even remember, but maybe you do. An AMFET 50 came in and was rebuilt in the shop and put back out in the field. instead of selling them a newer transmitter,
Yeah, that
they
still
rebuilt
happens.
the 50.
Yep. Yeah, we still get one in a year or two.
And they still run.
Well, sure they do.
Do you have any parts problems?
On the MFET 50, less than we do on some of the newer boxes. We always have parts problems. I can't remember a point in the last 20 odd years when there hasn't been one part or another that we've had a shortage of for whatever reason. You look last year, China, the semiconductor factory that builds over 3/4 of all the digital audio converters used worldwide burnt to the ground. Well, the fire lasted a good long while. I don't know if burnt to the ground, but so anybody who uses those specific DACs, all of a sudden, once they're out of stock, they're not building new, whatever the heck uses it. We're fortunate that we don't use that particular one for, I think we use it in one board that we do have a sub for. But I mean, I already know some of our competitors are running into shortage issues with that. COVID, of course, has taught us how this just-in-time, how fragile our delivery systems are.
And over the years, quite a few ICs have been replaced or iced out. You know, one of the things in the Fidelipack cart machines, there was a 5533, 5534, something like that. That had been out of stock for 10 years, out of production for 10 years when Fidelipack finally shut down, when LPB owned it. One of the questions along this line about parts availability, more critical, I think, is kludge construction. Now, we often talk about how the engineering community is aging out in many places. Consolidation is reducing the number of engineers. Some managers say, if I can do without an engineer for 3 years, I can buy a new transmitter, and so I don't care if it's fire. But some people do things like wiring AC into the funny places or bypassing interlock, or let's just say they keep it up here instead of on a piece of paper.
And in a lot of cases like that, I walked into one site, they had a 1 kilowatt that was having some issues, and I walked in and you couldn't open the front panels because their engineer, and I'm going to put that in quotation marks, he's since passed, rest his soul, but his version of wiring up the remote control was, instead of going to the conveniently provided remote interface terminal blocks, he drilled holes through the side of the transmitter, ran quad phone cable in, and soldered it directly to the back of the switches on the front panel of the transmitter. That was the remote control system. And then he ran all those quad cables into the studio and just put a little bank of push buttons. You want to turn the transmitter off, you push the button, which was wired in parallel to the button on the front of the transmitter. So it worked like a champ, except for the obvious safety and access, and when it didn't work, or when somebody dropped a book on the bank of buttons on the front of the on the remote control. So yeah, there's less so now as we've gotten more computerized. It's harder to kludge stuff, and that's a good thing, bad thing. Bob Hawkins in Indiana makes the point that with the old boxes, he can go to Ace Hardware, grab what he needs to get something on the air. It won't be pretty, it'll be ugly, and it may not be the safest, but it'll be on the air until he can get the parts to fix it. And he says solid state transmitters don't give you that luxury, and more that is the case. You're going to want to allow for backups, even if it's lower power. And that's something that historically you've had a team of engineers at a station. So if something went down, you had 3 guys working on it. Nowadays, you got 1 guy working on 3 stations. If 2 of them are down at the same time, you get to make the judgment call on which one you want to be off the longest. What do they say when you're on a flight? If the masks come down and you got more than 2 kids, decide which one's going to put you through retirement best. You got to make that call, and it's a daily business decision. It's like you said, I've got stations where they have made the conscious decision to run without an engineer because it's cheaper to replace the transmitter. And I don't think that's a good plan for the thing that generates the revenue that basically is your business, you know, but
Yep. Yep.
it's what we see.
And unfortunately, along with that, there's rarely an auxiliary transmitter of any power level
Yep.
in the case there. Although it's so simple now to put a kilowatt or even a 5 in the back of a truck and carry it out to a location should something happen.
Yep. And
I
that is something that we see more and more, is that I'm seeing a lot of even the smaller groups will buy one centralized backup, keep it at a studio, and then just lug it out to wherever they need it in a hurry. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. But again, you need somebody that knows what they're doing to hook it up and turn it on.
I've even seen some cases where the studio has an antenna and a +1 transmitter that they'll turn on for anyone that goes down.
I've set up several of those, and we've done stuff like I've used the silent sensor on the main transmitter to activate contact closures at the studio transmitter. So, you know, there's a bunch of things you can do, especially with like the WVRC8s or any of the little IP-based remote controls. And I see Mary's over there, so I'm sure Mary can hook you up with that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, we can put a contact closure out of any of our boxes for RF or audio loss. And at that point, you use that contact closure to either fire another contact closure to turn on your backup transmitter with on the right preset.
Of course, that has to be properly documented, because the next guy that comes in, this is the problem. When you come into a station and you're the new guy and you don't know all the little tricks and tips, whether somebody put a little box of push buttons in to do things, to switch transmitters, or I remember about 20 years ago, I was doing standby for a clear channel station, and they had a power problem that the power would drift up in the afternoon to about 112% or so. And I'd go in and I'd see that, and I'd press, number 4 lower, and the transmitter would promptly go off the air. And I discovered later on that was the way the remote control was wired. It was played off instead of power trim.
And that comes back to something like what David mentions, using alligator clips for permanent installs. I mean, or vice grips holding the antenna feed onto an AM tower. I actually got a picture of a pair of vice grips holding the feed onto an AM tower. Shiny new vice grips, you know, the feed broke. Okay, radio station temporary, you do what you can. But the next picture I got is when I was through that way 5 or 6 years later. Same vice grips are there, except now they're aviation orange, because the tower crew came through, they painted the tower, painted the vice grips and all. So, you know, I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, radio station temporary, I've seen vice grips used as really expensive clamps for holding ground strap together, and they were still there, you know, months, years later.
How about an alligator clip, not just on the punch block, but from the output tank to the coax?
Yep. On an AM, I've seen jumper, like battery booster cables as antenna feed. You know, not recommended. I wouldn't do it as a permanent installation, but you know, you do what you got to do to get it on the air, but golly, fix it as soon as you possibly can. And that's where staff engineers have a big benefit over the contract guys, because the contract guys will get pulled to 15 different things. Owner doesn't care. It's on the air. He's not going to call you back to fix the temporary thing you did last time until the next time you're in. So yeah, it's an ongoing battle for sure. I'm just taking a hunt to see who else we got in here too. Yeah, I'm looking, I see, I mean, Dave's here, Bert's here. It's a whole bunch of people that know more than me about installs. So, you know, it's kind of a awe-inspiring, you know, overwhelming. There you go. But other things that I run into a lot that we get a lot of questions. Oh, yeah. Hey, in the background. And where the heck are you guys, Bert?
We're at my home and work out in my workshop. You don't recognize it because that thing isn't behind me.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, no, I don't see the right background, but cool. Yeah,
Hold on.
so
The next, yeah, I'm waiting for the next expensive email quote.
yeah, Wilson's turned his camera off already. Oh, there he is now. He's come back from the phone call, so now we can repeat that. So Jeff, you get him a quote, make it happen. There. Anyway, the other thing that I've run into a lot as we get more and more into I guess software driven or computerized equipment. The laptop isn't an optional thing anymore as far as install. You know, you can make and I'll quantify, you can install any one of our transmitters without a laptop. You can do it in half the time with a lot less cussing with a laptop. So, you know, add one of those to the toolkit. And I don't care whether it's Windows or Linux or whatever you happen to prefer. Apple, they all work well. But yeah, you need to plan ahead for that as well.
That goes double if you've got the Orban Inside card.
If you got the Orban Inside card, unless you want to pick one of the factory presets and roll with it without ever tweaking it, then you need a laptop because you can't tweak the presets without one.
Or really the input levels.
One day you've got to do a checklist of adjectives used during an install.
Sorry, Barry, go ahead. I'm thinking of most of the adjectives I have are not the ones that I would ever put in print to dissemination amongst the general public. But remember, my background is all farmers and lumberjacks, so I know all the words.
I want to whip your cow. Oh, sorry.
There are so many non-alphabetic characters that you can use, though. That's the whole point.
You string a lot of them together. And so the other, several years ago, the one other thing that don't really tell a lot of people, although you can see it on my Facebook, my wife and I are probably the oldest Lego fans. I don't know, the oldest on the planet, but we build a lot of Lego kits. And I got a Disney castle. It was like 5,000 pieces, and you know, they rate them by expert level. Well, anything that's rated as expert, I shouldn't be allowed to play with most likely. But anyway, I got this thing for Christmas and I start putting it together at noon, and I finished it at 2 or 3 the next morning because I'm kind of obsessive when I start a project. I won't stop until it's done, unless I get bored, and then it'll never be done. But ask about our bathroom renovation someday. You'll find out about. Anyway, so I get this thing built, and I'm walking into the bedroom with it to put it on the table that we have for these things. And I stubbed my toe on the little door jamb or whatever. And the top half of this castle bumped into me, hit my forehead, and fell off. And so, you know, several hours worth of work just hit the floor. And I stopped and uttered the first phrase that came to mind. And my wife looked at me slack-jawed. And she said, I thought I had a really good sailor vocabulary, and I thought I knew all the words, but I've never heard those words strung together in quite that way before. And that's what it comes down to. You know, you've only got finite number of words, but boy, you can get really creative with how you put them together.
Yep. One of the questions that comes to mind when you are installing a new transmitter or getting ready to install a new transmitter, having enough airflow. Thank you, Ray. Watch your filters and such. But we also think about the situations where the transmitter itself, especially this is AM, I think, more than FM. Mm-hmm. The output network, the way it relates to your RF chain can change, and you can actually sound worse with the newer transmitter than you were on the old tube unit because of the difference between, let's say, an RCA transmitter and an Autel.
So I'll quantify that.
Thank you.
So number one, the tube transmitters typically generate a lot of even order harmonics that give you that softer, richer sound. And that's fine as far as it goes. You can simulate that. You can get pretty close So it's not that you sound worse necessarily. It sounds worse than it did until you do some tweaking. You can make the new one sound as good, or in my mind, now keep it in mind too, I had a lot of years on the firing range, so I'm half deaf on the left side because I'm a left-handed shooter. But anyway, that was back in the days before, little things like hearing protection were commonly used. So yeah, it's going to sound different. And one of the things we used to get a lot of complaints about, especially for the older AM sites, I had a guy call me up, and I still remember this particular call 30 years later. He goes, "I hate this new transmitter." And I said, "What's wrong? Is it not working right?" "Oh, no, it's working perfectly." "Well, was there a problem with the install?" "Nope, the install was smooth as silk." I said, "So do you have trouble bringing it up or wiring the remote?" "Nope, easy as pie, best thing ever." Said, "So what's the problem?" He goes, "I can hear every hiss, crack, and pop in my studio, and I'm going to spend another $30,000 fixing the studio now." He goes, "Couldn't hear that before." So that's the sort of thing that we hear even now. I mean, with the FMs, a little less so, because FM's been pretty decent sound quality for a lot of years. But yeah, you are, like you said, you are going to change you're going to change the sound from one box to the other. I mean, a Harris Digit doesn't sound like a Nautel NE50, to somebody with discerning ears. And again, we've just established I'm half deaf, so I'm not that somebody. And I've been asked to set up processing before, and I'll just flat out refuse. It's like, nope, I'm not touching it. You want somebody that actually knows what they're doing and can hear the difference. Get somebody like Grady, or somebody who actually has ears that work, instead of, my, I can hear when my wife's hollering. I've got that one pitched. Of course, I can also not hear when she's talking, but that's a whole different story. So yeah, there is going to be some differences like that. You do want to allow time for it. And you want to, and this is one of the other things, and it comes back to, and somebody had mentioned earlier, I think it might've been David, that, yeah, contractor doesn't care as much as the staff person. I'll respectfully disagree with that, because there are a lot of contractors I know who really take ownership of the stations they work for. So there are a lot of really good contract engineers out there too. Definitely, they don't always have the same level of investment, but there are a lot of staff engineers who don't either. So it'll vary very, very much from one person to the next. I think
Or
that's
it's also the manager and the owner that
yeah,
doesn't want to pay the freight to have
right.
a proper engineer, even a contractor, come regularly.
Or they'll have a good engineer and drive them off because they nickel and dime everything, or second guess everything. Or you gotta trust the people that are working for you. One of our CEOs, we've had a 1, 2, 3, 4 over the years. Well, 3, because we had one was twice. But anyway, of the CEOs we've had over the years I've been here, one of them said once, he goes, "It's not my job to know how to run this place." He goes, "It's your guys' job to know how to run this place. It's my job to know how to pick the people that know how to run this place." And that's how we've always worked. I mean, Kevin, our owner, hired me for customer service, and he went out on the road back in the day and left me and our secretary to basically build the procedures that we use now. And it's funny, because our current head of support, John Welton, come in, and he's going through stuff. We're talking one day, and he calls me his unpaid support tech, because I don't come out of his budget where I work for sales. But he goes, it's kind of weird that we'll be going through all these procedures, and I realize that your name is down as the author for every single one of them. And it's like, well, because that we built the procedures, because Nautel didn't have a customer service department before Kevin got hired to manage it and hired me to be the tech. So that's kind of how it worked. But yeah, you've got to have some faith in the people that work for you. And the funny thing is, if you had the faith in them and give them the power to make the decisions, they'll invest a lot more of themselves into what they're doing than if you're just treating it like a job.
Hey, Jeff, one thing that's major that should be on the top of the list, if you're replacing a transmitter, it's time to check the whole room, no rodents or anything are getting in, because
Yep.
now's the time to fix it.
Yep.
Because the last thing you want to do is be operating on the back working on something, and have another pair of eyes show up on your shoulder.
Right, and this I've actually had that. Only the pair of eyes was a, black snake, but after I changed my underwear, we came to an agreement. See, me and snakes have an understanding. If I see a snake, I'm going to be 20 feet away. I'm moving fast, and they're all rattle-headed copper moccasins to me, and that's the way I like it. I spent a lot of time in various parts of the world where most of the snakes were unfriendly, and I'm just perfectly happy to maintain that level of respect. But anytime you put in a major piece of gear, like I was talking about with the guy rebuilding the studio that had the daisy chain of junction boxes, anytime you do a major upgrade like that is a good time to do a good stem to stern, microphone to antenna viewpoint of what in this particular part of the block diagram could be improved or amended or corrected while I'm in the process. Because yeah, it's a lot cheaper to fix it as part of a rebuild than to come back and do it later, or to have to deal with the aftermath if you didn't do it. So no, that's a really good point, David. Thank you.
Yeah, I remember working on one AM site where I was working, and suddenly I noticed a porcupine in the room. I quit that minute.
Well, at least it wasn't a skunk. Well, we're coming up on the hour here, and I know Jeff is going to want to go play barbecue before too long. So make an invitation here. Anyone that is with us that has a question on transmitter install, transmitter selection, anything that you would like to know, or
So Brian Black asked if I use Kregel with the Legos, and the answer is no, because I have a 12-year-old who certain sets will get deemed not disposable, I guess, but after, some of the ones I put together, it's like, you better not mess with this or I will remove parts of your anatomy and beat you over the head with them, which seems to be an effective child rearing technique, although probably not one I should have said on a recording. Having said that, a lot of the littler ones we do get disassembled, and so no, we don't glue anything together, because we've got probably 200 gallons worth of Rubbermaid bins full of various Legos that have been all sorted out. I have a whole room in the house dedicated to them. So yeah, we don't Kregel.
we should have you take a camera.
Jeff, just so you know, you're now an international offender since you're in Canada and we're here in the US.
Yeah, gee, thanks. I appreciate that. I should have hit the mute button before I said that out loud. Of course, that's been the story of my life for a lot of years. But anyway, so yeah, that's if anybody else has got any other high points, I think we hit the big ones that come to my mind. Grounding, pay attention to the grounding, because it's really easy. And of course, I beat this drum over and over, but it's just so easy to put in a new box and just piggyback a ground strap over from some other piece of equipment instead of running its new ground strap, or you lay it on top of an old system. And a lot of times things get built up and they get layered and layered and layered, and nobody knows where anything goes anymore.
We're going to get Tom Labarge back again from Ground Links, and he continues to point out that a copper rod is not sufficient ground, and you need to really measure and know what you've got. Many grounds are 60, 100 ohms or more.
Yep. And Gordon mentioned I managed to go an hour without mentioning ferrites, and I guess even if I mentioned him now, he's still right, because I logged in about 5:02, so we're already past that. I'm not sure how that happened, Gordon. But yeah, definitely ferrites. See, I know why, because we provide them with everything, so I don't think you really have to plan for them. But definitely, that is again part of the lightning protection. It's always good to go through the whole facility when you're deciding to put in a new piece of gear. So there you go.
Jeff, I got a question. How often should you pull the transmitter out, take the covers off, and blow it out? I think one of your old coworkers recommended once a year, something like that. Do we keep the filters changed every 3 months or so, and it's in a clean environment?
So
any recommendation on out?
Yeah. So I get that answer or question a lot. Same with how often do I change the air filters? And my answer is always, it depends. It's very site dependent. Now, WWW in Detroit, their AM site was located right next to a steel refinery. And when you walked in there, there was a 1/4 inch of steel dust on every horizontal surface. That transmitter got damp ragged out almost monthly. I've walked into sealed air conditioned sites where 5 years after the transmitter went in, you could white glove it and not come up with a speck of dust. So I can't give you a specific interval. My recommendation is that if it gets to the point that I can see the dust, I want it cleaned out. But having said that, the solid state boxes, we don't have the HV stuff that you've got as much of it, I should say, that you've got with the tube rigs. So there's a little less risk of arcing. I still, yeah, if I want the dust, and Gordon makes a really good point about using a vacuum as opposed to compressed air or a blower. I really don't like blowing the dirt around because I may be moving it from a place where it wasn't arcing to a place where it might. I prefer, if I'm going to do that, I shut the thing down and go in with like a stiff bristle paintbrush and a shop vac. And this comes back to one of the tips I've sort of used with folks before is if you take a piece of zip cord, 8 to 10 feet of zip cord, and strip about 6, 8 inches and just duct tape it around the end of the nozzle of your shop vac, then you can put a lug on the other end and bolt it to the chassis or whatever you're vacuuming, and you won't build up static on the plastic of the shop vac in case you happen to drive it across the circuit board. So, you know, you don't want to end up popping a bunch of CMOS ICs with your shop vac either. So I really do like vacuum over compressed air.
That is great. A great idea with the vacuum. I love that. I never heard of that before.
And I mean, I've run into, you know, you can buy the computer grade vacuums, and the computer grade vacuums have steel mesh woven into the hose. So they're not inclined to build up the static anyway, but it's just something that I sort of started doing it because I've got a cheap old Canadian Tire shop vac, and my Canadian Tire shop vac, I've picked up static big enough to actually hurt myself. Like, you know, how you get a zap and it's like, oh, shit. I said that on the recording too. Whoops. There you go. See, every mic is live until it isn't. But yeah, so I've just started doing it in general when I'm working on anything electronic.
Anyone else have a question here? Grady is wondering why people blow leaves. Well, that's so they can blow them on the next property.
Becomes somebody else's problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, I'm what do you call it? I wouldn't say environmentalist. I'm lazy is what started it, but I don't blow my leaves or vacuum my leaves at all. I just mow them, chop them up, and leave them on the lawn. Seems to work.
There's an old case in British law about shoveling water from your property to the next one. You're still responsible for it.
There you go. I'll remember that next
study in law school.
Next time I'm out with the snowblower, I'll pay attention to where I'm directing it a little more.
By the way, my grandson would love to meet you because he is a Lego freak. We're trying to persuade him to study architecture.
So my middle boy is, he was the one, actually the younger one is probably even better again. Again, more exposure. We got into this stuff about that time they were both in their prime. But the younger one is very much the one who, he gets concepts. He thinks things and he can create. And he came out the other day with a dragon. He didn't build it from a kit. He just went through the boxes, scavenged pieces through our various collections until he found everything he needed. And I said, how did you do that? And he goes, well, I just added parts until it looked like a dragon. I said, okay, there you go. Well, I guess, you know, and I mean, who was it? I think it was Michelangelo. Somebody asked him once how he did his sculpting. And he said, I just figure out what I want to make and take away everything that doesn't look like that thing. And yeah, same concept, only in reverse.
Those Wilkinson transmitters. Minimal parts.
Was that Wilkinson or was that one of Bernie's? Because whoever
Well,
it was,
Yeah.
yeah, take parts.
Months of TV.
That's yes, thank you. Take parts out until it stops working and put the last part you took out back in.
Mhm.